Mr. Carlos Sanchis Ibor, who is an expert in information geographic systems, geographic information systems, sorry, at the University of Valencia. He works in the Valencian system of irrigation study in the Valencia Politecnica University, and he's also professor in the Department of Geography of the University of Valencia since 2002. He developed his research work on water under the various perspectives, and the hydraulic perspective, from hydraulic perspective to fluvial geomorphology, but concentrating mainly on irrigation in the Mediterranean region. He's also a founder and member of the board of directors of the Asut Foundation, which is dealing with protection of Mediterranean wetlands and traditional irrigation, and president of the board of directors of the Albufera Natural Park in Valencia.
Thank you very much to the organization for the invitation. Thank you also to my friend Thierry for exchanging the time of our presentations. And as you can see, my presentation is not exactly focused on irrigation and water governance, because after discussing with the organization, we have decided to focus on a more specific topic, because we thought that this water governance issue was somehow too wide. And we have focused in this aspect, which is more connected to groundwater and to the environmental concerns that are around the technological change in irrigation. So my presentation deals with the evolution of the transition from flood to drip irrigation and the ins and outs that this process has had in Spain in the recent years. First of all, I want to make an introduction about how this debate on drip irrigation has taken place worldwide. And the problem with this debate is that irrigation modernization or the introduction of new water saving techniques is somehow a biased idea in the way that these techniques consider efficiency at the local scale, but they are never considering which are the effects of the technological change or the local technological change at the basin scale, which sometimes or many times are different from what we observe at the local scale. These transitions are stimulated by the powerful notion of modernity. Modernity always sounds well, always is a stimulus to improve for users, for managers, and then this has somehow boosted the expansion of these techniques. And also these techniques have found an adequate scenario in the fact that the water policy in the last decades has been oriented towards water saving, to induce or to stimulate water saving in many nations, particularly in those regions where water is scarce, structurally or temporarily, or in semi-arid or arid countries. Moreover, these techniques have found the support of the industrial sector. You can see below 3 slides of how the industrial sector promotes these techniques with the aim, obviously, of making business in the expansion of these new technologies and developing new markets for the products. So drip irrigation has been widely promoted worldwide as a silver bullet, as a solution for the global water crisis, and hundreds of experimental works or trials developed at plot scale have demonstrated widely their efficiency. And the FAO or United Nations have disseminated this idea with the motto of more crops per drop. This idea has been widely promoted and is well rooted in sound scientific literature at plot scale. And this has made that many governments, many governmental agencies and institutions have promoted and have invested in order to expand this technique throughout many agricultural regions in order to achieve these expected water savings. Farmers have supported this idea, sometimes not looking for these water savings, but looking for an increase in production. And also the industry, as I've said before, are also interested in this promotion because of their earning or the possibilities of increasing their incomes. So it has been perceived, this technological change, as a win-win strategy throughout many semi-arid and arid countries. However, by the end of the last century, some authors started to question the results of this technological change, because the experiments that were developed were showing only a portion of the water cycle. We're only showing the efficiency at the local scale, but not what was happening at basin scale or at a larger scale. And then at that scale, these expected earnings, these expected water savings can be turned into paper water, because sometimes if we simply see what's happening in the plot where the inputs are reduced, we miss an important part of the hydrological cycle. When drip irrigation is introduced in this system, in the fields, what happens is that the plant increases water consumption, and what we really save is the water that in the former situation was going to other fields as return flows, or the water that was recharged in the aquifer. So there's savings for the farmer at that plot, but there's losses for the farmer which is in the neighboring plot, or for the farmers or other users that are pumping water from the aquifer or the natural systems, depending on that ecosystems. So this coined the concept rebound effect, because in some areas of the world was observed that when water-saving technologies were introduced, the water use at the basin scale increased. Some authors have divided this effect in three effects or paradoxes, such as Scott did some years ago, distinguishing between the sectoral paradox, the efficiency paradox, and the scale paradox. The sectoral paradox takes place when the water hypothetically saved is sent to other regions or to other irrigation systems, and then globally there's not saving at all. The efficiency paradox takes place when someone who introduced drip irrigation expand his or her irrigation area, or introduces a more water demanding crop, intensification of his production. And the other paradox is the scale paradox, when the water hypothetically saved is sent to any other place for environmental purposes. So in each of these cases, finally, globally, there's no water saving at all. The result is a zero-sum game. This arose a new paradigm that Saskia van der Kooi clearly defined with the words at the end of the seminal article: there is no scientific evidence of water saving after the introduction of drip irrigation. And more recently, the FAO has published a report based on numerous cases, numerous study cases throughout the world, in which the results show that there is a clear zero-sum game in those systems introducing drip irrigation technology. The impact of this new technology increases local water consumption, increases the consumption of water by plants, by crop production increases, improving the situation of farmers, the economic situation, but this is at the expense of water availability in the neighboring systems or at the global, at the rest of the basin. This has also achieved the Bible of the scientists, the Science Journal, in which a recent paper has explained the extent of this problem or of this new paradigm, and making a good accountability of water it is shown that while surface irrigation involves a groundwater recharge or a surface runoff between 15 and 50%, in drip irrigation, surface runoff and subsurface recharge only ranges between 0 and 10%. So there's a radical difference, and here is the water which is safe. Water which is locally safe, but not safe at local scale, at a global scale. So transferring this question to the Spanish arena, I must say that it has been a political and social storm, and somehow a manichaeistic debate between people or agricultural sector strongly defending the implementation of drip irrigation, and the environmentalist lobby deeply criticizing the expansion of these techniques. The war somehow started with a report written by the World Wildlife Foundation, in which they say that modernization of irrigation was a bad business for the nature and the society because of the non-compliance of European environmental objectives, because this technique was perceived as a difficulty to adapt the sector for climate change, because the increased greenhouse gases emissions, because some problems detected in the economic viability of farms, and the effect on the demand of new subsidies. However, there was a problem. This report was based in false data. And I saw in a meeting here in Valencia 5 years ago how the president of the World Wildlife Foundation in Spain had to retract from this report and had to admit that some of the data used for this report, producing this report, were not correct. The National Federation of Irrigation Communities replied with a document saying a success for nature and society, replying the title of the World Wildlife Foundation report, and showing with the same data that the World Wildlife Foundation have used, that the results were very different, and that were significant savings, local savings in the communities using at that report. But beyond this problem with data, what was more relevant in this report from the National Federation of Irrigation Communities was the evolution at the national scale, because these were official national data, of the irrigated lands and the water use at the national scale. If you see this graph, this chart, you see that in blue we have the water use in Spain between 2005 and 2014, and the area of the irrigation sector, the irrigated area in Spain. So we see how during that period the area used for irrigation increased from 3.3 million of hectares to 3.7 today, while the water use decreased from 16.5 millions of cubic meters to 15. Today, 15.5. So, while the irrigated area has been increasing, the water use has been decreasing. So, there's no evidence of rebound effect at the national scale at this moment. What we have observed in Mediterranean irrigation is based on our works in the Valencia region. This is not a work, or the ideas I'm going to explain are not only mine, are part of the research of a group that is working here in the UPB, and sometimes in cooperation with some other institutions. We start from a situation in which in this region there has been a wide expansion of drip irrigation between 1995 and the financial crisis of 2008. 1995, this expansion started because there was a huge drought, probably the more severe drought in the last 30 years. And this stimulate farmers and politicians to look for water-saving strategies for the future. And this stimulate the change of the irrigation systems in all the region. And we've seen how drip irrigation have changed from being or from occupying 100,000 hectares by the beginning of the century up to 200,000 hectares today, while flood irrigation has been decreasing. Today, drip irrigation is the 70% of the irrigated areas in the Valencia region. So we have a lot of possible cases to study and to analyze these effects. I must say that during that same period, if the irrigated area more or less was the same, has been constant, but what we observe is that the rain-fed areas, the dry crops, have been dramatically decreasing because there's no profitability in these cultivation techniques today. The only profitable agriculture today in the region is the irrigated productions. So what we made was starting to analyze different aspects of this transformation system. And the first thing we wanted to see is how water use have changed in the region. And for that purpose, we use 77 irrigation communities of the region in which we could analyze how the water use have evolved. I'm referring to irrigation communities because irrigation in the region is almost exclusively organized through collective institutions. There's no individual irrigation systems. Most of the water use is delivered and distributed by collective management institutions known as comunidades de regantes or irrigation communities. So we start to work in 17 communities still using gravity systems, and in 60 using drip system to compare what was happening there. And what we observed is that between ones and the others, the use of water changed significantly. Flood was almost doubling the amount of water used by drip irrigation communities. And when we analyzed one by one each of the communities, we saw that those using drip irrigation systems or those adopting drip irrigation system have decreased in 53% the use of water in the period 98-2009. Whereas the not modernized irrigation systems, those using gravity irrigation along the whole period, also reduced their water use, but significantly less, only in a 27%. So we can attribute to the introduction of drip irrigation a decrease in water use of 25% approximately. We also analyzed the effects on the irrigation coast, and we observed that those irrigation communities using surface water observe an increase in the water cost because they have to pressurize their irrigation systems. But this pressurization was widely compensated in those communities using mixed water, I mean groundwater and surface water at the same time, or in those using groundwater. In fact, in those using mixing water, those mixing groundwater and surface water, the results of the water price were a significant saving, economic saving, because due to the fact that they've reduced in a 50% the use of water, this 50% was the part of groundwater they were using, the part of expensive water. So they could limitate their irrigation practice to use the surface water, which was cheaper. So it was an economic profit significant in these communities. But up to this point, we were analyzing only the water use. I mean, what is taking the community before applying the water to the plots. We wanted to go deeper in this question, and we compare at plot scale using 10 plots of different sectors in the same community of irrigation, one of them using drip and one of them using flood irrigation systems. And we observed that the water applied reduced in 22% among the two systems, but this figure is so low in comparison with the previous figures, because the main channel of this system was previously pressurized. So part of the effect of the whole pressurization is not analyzed here, only the plot or sector scale. And then we observe this 22% of water savings. But we also observe a significant increase in the water transpired by crops. So in what technically is water consumption by the plant. And we finally observed that the reduction in the water applied in the plots was equivalent to the reduction in irrigation returns. So the water hypothetically saved was exactly the same amount of water that we detected that was not going to other fields or to groundwater. So a zero-sum game, as we were expecting. Nevertheless, we observed that the production per unit area increased by 27%. This made very happy the farmers in the area. And there was an increase in the annual income of farmers of 830 euros per hectare, which, considering the current crisis in agriculture, was very positive for them. However, our conclusion was that we need some corrective measures on the water bodies receiving these irrigation returns that were somehow missed, and that obviously were the key point in this assessment of the water saved. We, cooperating with a group from Switzerland, a group of researchers expert in groundwater, tried to analyze the impact on groundwater of this change in these two sectors. And finally, analyzing with more detail the question, we found that this effect on water recharge was not so intense as we expected before. Our surprise came from one reason. During the dry and normal years, as we expected, there was an important difference between flood irrigation and drip irrigation. And we observed that flood irrigation had a higher recharge on groundwater. But during the wet years, does not happen. During the wet years, more or less, the results are very similar, or even in some times, drip irrigation recharge more the aquifer than flood irrigation. Because when there's a rainfall event, the first drop that touches the saturated area of the plant is rapidly converted into recharge for the groundwater system, because this area is permanently wet. So this effect in wet years enhance the infiltration effect and permitted that in this particular type of years, the results are quite similar. So the global effect of losing part of the recharge is not as big as we expected at the beginning. However, the global results say that obviously moving from flood to drip involves a loss in the groundwater recharge capacity. And also in the impact on attached ecosystem. And here in this case, in this study case, and in other areas in the region, this is critical because we have many wetlands at the end of the irrigation systems. And this is, for example, the case of the Albufera wetland that you see in this picture, which receives part of its water inputs from the return flows from irrigation. And due to the fact that irrigation modernization was threatening these inputs, there was a pressure from the environmentalist organization, there was a pressure from the scientists of the region, trying to alert that the irrigation modernization could introduce some problems or cause some problems in the wetland. So finally, as a result of these pressures, the basin agency, the Confederación Hidrográfica, which is the institution responsible for water allocation in the region, have reserved 40 million cubic meters to be introduced in the Albufera as a compensation for all the losses that these modernization techniques are causing in the surrounding area of the wetland. So again, we go back to this idea of the zero-sum game. We finally have to introduce by other channels the water hypothetically saved. So the water savings vanish, absolutely vanish in the region, and maybe the transformation to drip irrigation has allowed us to increase production, has simplified the life of farmers, but there's no water saving at all. We also analyze other social and institutional aspects of this transformation. We saw how the companies developing drip irrigation in the region introduced very expensive, well, cheap filters, but very expensive to maintain, because they wanted to produce a product for farmers very easily to be buy, but they were not concerned on what was happening later. And farmers found later that these cheap filters were very expensive to maintain. And it happens the same with the type of deposit for fertilizers they use. And they found many mistakes in oversizing and undersizing of the irrigation networks and in distribution of pressures in the design of the system, because these companies arrived to the irrigation communities and they tried to somehow impose their knowledge, their scientific knowledge, without hearing, without considering the suggestions of the farmers. So finally, the farmers, what have been obliged to do is to reconvert and to readapt these systems with many bricolage work in order to rearrange the systems that were implanted by that companies. So new technologies can reduce management costs, but if the people that designs the technologies works in a collaborative way with the people which is using these systems. Moreover, we observe in these systems that the change from flood to drip involve a centralization of decision making, and many decisions on irrigation that were originally made on the fields were under the new technique made at the offices of the government boards of the technician offices of the irrigation communities. And we also observe how the professional profile of the officers of the irrigation community changed from a very informal or traditional trainings to real professional technicians trained in universities. So there was somehow a change in the profile or in the way these communities manage the water and in the type of technicians responsible for these functions. As a part of the change, we also observe how some companies try to use drip irrigation as a Trojan horse to get long contracts for management in these irrigation communities. In some cases, causing problems of lack of transparency, increasing the cost of irrigation, and breaking the trust that the farmers have among themselves after sometimes 100 or 1,000 years of common management of the irrigation system. In some cases, this privatization of water management in irrigation communities have ended in a reversal and in a recollectivization of the management system by farmers. Although there has been also cases of respect or companies respecting the principles of collective management that are still in practice in the area. I mean, there's some companies that have clearly identified which can be the role inside an irrigation community, and they just work as outsourced companies, and they not try to control the whole system. And when they have left the control of the system to farmers, this relationship among farmers and companies is more sustainable and more prolonged in time. We have also observed how this enormous investment made by the public authorities in the promotion of drip irrigation has been somehow a missed opportunity to fight against the institutional atomization of irrigation. We have a problem here in some regions in which we have lots of small irrigation communities, sometimes overlapping their own irrigation network, which generates a very complex and not very efficient management. So in two cases, this one I am showing, the case of Villena, another in La Vall, another area in the region, spontaneously, when farmers were applying for these subsidies for modernization, asked for a common project for the whole valley or the whole area. But in other areas, they didn't apply for this type of option. They didn't suggest this idea to the administration. The administration didn't suggest also any idea of merging communities, of making more sustainable institutions. And we missed the opportunity to readdress or to reorganize some institutional maps that are too complex, with many scattered irrigation communities with a lower efficiency of management. Finally, we have also the question of fertigation. We have observed that these techniques change the use of inputs. Drip irrigation is using less fertilizers than flood irrigation. The difference is quite significant. And also the type of technique used also makes that leaching is less dangerous for groundwater in drip irrigation systems. So this is probably the most positive outcome for the environment that we have observed of drip irrigation. But there's a problem in the region, a social problem, that most of this fertigation is introduced in a centralized way. So this is hindering the expansion of organic farming, because fertilizers are introduced in the filters and fertigation schemes, such as you can see in the picture below. And fertilizers are introduced before any farmer could get the water from their hydrants. So in that way, if any of them wants to produce in an organic way, he or she cannot do it, because they all are receiving this common recipe of fertilizers. This is something which now is in a process to be solved through several strategies that the regional government is developing. And in fact, since 3 years ago, the regional government has decided not to give any subsidy to any community that puts any obstacle for organic farming. So this is somehow in a way to be solved. And the last question, finally, and personally for me is one of the most painful consequences of this change, is the loss of the historical heritage irrigation. When drip irrigation arrives to some systems, it involves the abandonment of the historical infrastructures. In this case, you can see the Casa Clara and Casa Fosca, the dark house and lighthouse, in which water is being delivered since the medieval Islamic period. Now, as a result of the introduction of drip irrigation in the Gandia irrigation system, water is not running anymore but through these canals. And all the touristical projects developed by some municipalities around this heritage and around this landscape has been dismantled, because without water, it makes no sense to be preserved or to be continued as a touristical resource. So summarizing, because I'm afraid I'm taking too much time. This is not a matter of black and whites. There's many gray tones in this question, and there's a lack of a holistic approach. We have observed that there's no widespread rebound effect in the region. We have observed a significant reduction in use. This is positive particularly during the drought periods, because it increases the warranty of supply. We see that costs rise in some systems, but decrease in others, and in many cases compensated by the increase in production and the reduced fertigation cost. We saw how fertigation is very positive for groundwater quality conservation, but we have observed that all this process took place without a sufficient prior reflection on the many effects that was having. There's severe impacts on heritage, organic farming, and ecosystems that require permanent control and compensation actions. And finally, I think there is no room for manichaeism. There's a need of analyzing case by case and to do a holistic ex-ante analysis of any transformation here and everywhere. I mean, drip irrigation is not the effects of drip irrigation are not a universal value, and in every case, the local particularities can provide or give a very different result.
Couple of words about Thierry Ruf, who is agronomist and research manager in the ERD in Montpellier. For the last 40 years, his research on the organization of water territories. From 2016 to 2018, Thierry Ruf and did scientific coordination of the Museum for the Civilization of Water in Morocco, and is now involved in the creation committee museum for a water museum in Provence, and he will talk today about family irrigated agriculture in Oasis mountain and at the outskirts of cities.
Bonjour à tous, moi aussi
Good afternoon. I have a constraint because I have to deliver a conference at 6:15 p.m. I got about 20 minutes to time available, so I'll try to go quickly. I work within several cultural and geographical contexts in the Med region, but I will talk mainly about Morocco as an example of complexity that exists between diverse forms of family farming, agriculture in a mountain and arid plains, where the issue of tables is essential for two reasons. In the mountains, already irrigated agriculture with tens of canals means that they should mobilize spring water, and it is a mountain underground water table that will circulate into terraces, highly developed in Morocco, as you can see here, and which then through distribution is, we saw what Carl showed, through major infiltration in the terraces is in fact the the reserves of successive uses of water upstream, downstream in this kind of catchment basin. Now, you see here, for example, characteristics of such mountain farming communities. They ensure fair distribution of water, and all terraces are connected to the system and receive water either from the source, natural source, or through the water recovery system in the different stone channels or canals. This mountain irrigation is connected with that of the plains, and on this image you can see that the high valley on the Abunges Valley, and the water from this valley will go to the major hydraulic system, where there will be powerful players as well, irrigation, complex irrigation techniques. They use drip and spraying system as opposed to the gravity system. So we've worked a lot on this on the valley, the Ibor Valley. It is upstream from the zones recognized as useful zones for Morocco, whereas the mountains are considered as touristic areas and less submitted to interesting water management. Yet in this valley, there was the involvement in the modernization project of hydraulic infrastructures, the involvement of the World Bank, and an intervention project to reshape, as we saw in Spain, in Valencia, to reshape the gravity canals, go to drip irrigation, adopt new crops in a space which has a long history, which had never been really integrated into the modernization process of the engineers and economists of the World Bank. So those are lands which have been there for centuries or millennia. On the left hand, you see the delimitations are well marked and they correspond to the old usages. So this situation, was disturbed by the reconfiguration, institutional geographical reconfiguration. There were about 30 villages in the valley, and the external intervention was such that wanted to limit the number of associations of irrigators, and finally led to a certain number of conflicts between the associations and between the villages as to on the various networks. And one of the reasons why we did collective expertise, and we looked at one of the parts of the valley, and we realized that there was this path, this route of water in the gravity system, which made it possible for each entity, each village, to take water and to transport it and to use it, but also to give it to the leave it to the downstream network, left bank and right bank. So, which means that basically, instead of having a territorial, social, institutional understanding of the components of this valley, which, as you see, comprises 7 or 8 social hydraulic organizations, well, we created one association, but which did not take the knowledge, the rules and the distribution, and by creating a major conflict within the valley. We see this, these notions of linkage of terraces and terroirs, and you know, from villages to villages. And in this case, there is a major historical conflict between these two villages in the 18th century, and this was solved by the sort of water court, back to Valencia, that is basically the ability, the power was able to organize water attribution negotiated between upstream and downstream zones, and this regulatory body was the HABUS, which is the system which means merging the heritage for charity, but also for the distribution and organization of water in Morocco.
So the power over water didn't just depend on the Sultan, but on the religious foundation that was autonomous when it came to legal decisions. Now, all of this, everything that happened led to partial uses, and I don't have the exact quantification that we had from Carles when he was talking about Valencia, but a good 50% of the water used in the mountain terrace systems in Morocco goes downstream and recharges the alluvial underground areas, and that's what we find around Marrakesh. There's a whole system of interconnected channels. In dark orange, you can see areas that were connected to the Renant Gallery that was used. So this used the Marrakesh water table capacity with permanent water at 10 meters down across the plain. And then in pink, in light pink, you can see the Segia systems, the gravity-based systems that form an outline around the Renant galleries. So the water coming from the mountain is therefore used by the gravity system, but the gravity system loses water, recharges the water table, and then other zones can take the water out again. So the current situation is fairly complicated because out of the systems that worked, only a few are left. There's been a lot of desertification happening. And then there are things like golf courses, so suburban needs. And we've got the plot of these different galleries, and there are several hundred of these galleries. So a draining gallery, it's like a horizontal well with a very slow, a very soft gradient, and it, by gravity, it transfers water. The water is transferred to the areas where the villagers can use it. So the draining galleries, and I won't go back over this, but it's part of Mediterranean water culture on the northern bank and the southern bank. And in Morocco, this is something that developed quite considerably as of the year 1000. Now, this draining gallery is the negative of the aqueduct. It's also a hydraulic monument. You can't see it as well. It depends. It picks up water that's transferred, but we're talking about the same function. You take water from one place where there is a lot of it, and you take it to a place where it's used to produce food, but also used for building houses and for urban purposes. So these Marrakesh galleries, the colonial engineers were absolutely flabbergasted when they saw how these different galleries were actually organized. This is another document. It shows the spatialized responsibility in the 30s and 40s, where the galleries were monitored, were followed. So readings of flow rates were taken, and there were lists drawn up by the managers so that people knew who managed what. So some of these galleries were royal, some of them were public, some were for the local community, as we saw with Spain, and some of them were private. There were even some for the colonial settlers that were built up until the 1950s. So this extraordinary assembly, it worked based on water loss, gravity water loss. So not just from fields, but you also had contributions from different channels coming from the interfluvial area between the wadis on each side of the city of Marrakesh. Now, all of this saw a boom over the course of different centuries with the colonial settlement. And these criteria almost disappeared. So we tried, these ketera almost disappeared. So we focus on this amphitheater. We looked at areas where water was drained. We looked at areas where water was transferred, where there was no agriculture, there was no pumping, there were no wells. And the aquifer that kind of, so we've got the aquifer from the foothills of the Atlas to the and the zone that extends beyond that. So there were different collective, individual, private management systems, but everything was part of a whole assembly that was built up over the course of time, which was imbalanced after centuries of existing. I won't go into detail about the Segia that feed into other areas, essentially the west of Morocco, where the water arriving could contribute. So the galleries stopped working with the water table when it went down. So that reduction in height, and we'll see the impact of agricultural modernization, the use of pumping stations that was set up in the colonial period and were developed in the 90s. So we went from 10 meters to a depth of 100 meters for the water table, which meant that there was no chance for people to continue get organized socially or economically. So, by the by, on the urban sites in Marrakesh, we're still selling the idea that we've still got these ketera feeding into Marrakesh. Over 5,000 are used to irrigate Marrakesh, but this is a double lie. There were only ever 650 at most, and they no longer exist. So it's a lie. They no longer exist because of modernization. Thousands, if not tens of thousands of wells, boreholes, siphoned off the water table for completely new uses linked to the city's urban model. So different real estate developments associated with golf courses, for example. So lots of things were reconfigured. And then, of course, you have agriculture, exports of olives to Europe, to Russia, and to America. Now, the fruit of this highly intense agricultural activity with all of the exports meant that the palm tree areas died off. And this led to a lot of disorder in the landscape. Now, from the point of view of the possibility of reusing these galleries, so architectural works were carried out, some interesting works were carried out. The idea was to create underground housing with the re-greening mechanisms. This is Tamslot, the city of Tamslot. This was a municipal initiative where they try to reorganize things from an urban point of view. One of the consequences of the end of the ketera was that there were no more fountains. They were not maintained anymore. And so this heritage, this domestic water heritage was lost. I don't have much time, so I won't go into all of the details. Now, in Morocco, there are also places where things happen differently, notably in the southern Moroccan oases. Here, you've got the spectacular picture of some of the galleries in Morocco. This is the Tinria zone, and the person you see there is a sociologist, Mohamed Madan, and that gallery has existed for several centuries, and it's gone further down into the earth because of the water table problem, but a water table problem that is under control by different associations of farmers. So it's a small model, but we can see the concentration of water upstream above the city of Tinguiria, so that the quantity of water that comes down from the Atlas is limited and the area seems drier, but it gets greener thanks to the system of Ketera. So once again, there's a very strong link between gravity irrigation, loss, and new uses linked to the ability to drain water and to bring in water. So this was studied by Jean Margat in the 1940s, in fact. And for example, there's this village, Igem Agdim, where you've got cultural areas watered by the Ketera, which is just next to. So in fact, there's a combination between urban development and the development of the oasis itself. So I'll just go quickly through these different diagrams. So they show that we're talking about water areas that are a little bit like mosaics. They receive water and they produce water. So the Ketera, this is the old Ketera in Aram. So it's monumental. And there is a lot of work being carried out on it. And I'll come back to that at the end of my presentation. Another example is the Skura palm tree area. So we've got terraced galleries in this area. It's close to Ouarzazate. So the mosaic is hydraulical, but also social. There are different tribes. There are 7 or 8 different tribes who share, and this is what we saw with the Marrakesh Wadi. They share the water table. They drain it with transport areas, consumption areas, and also these consumption areas or use areas that become recharging areas, and they can only work together, even if there is no centralization or federation in terms of the way the water is managed, which is what we saw with the case in Spain. So here again, the people here are mathematicians. They are able to organize the gravity system in a very detailed manner, in a very precise manner. So, you know, I remain flabbergasted when I look at this system, which is still being used today. Is the biggest Ketera of this oasis has flow rates going up to 200 liters per second, which is considerable. It's probably the most productive in North Africa. So there we are. So the result of this work was placed in a water museum in Marrakesh. This was financed by the Habous, so that institution that was mentioned already. It's no longer in charge of water. It's a centralized institution now that organizes the assignment of water from the dams. So this museum goes back over the history of the city's water, the house, in other words, the agricultural suburbs of Marrakesh, but also the mountains and the oases. So this work has enabled us, and I have to say, with the considerable contribution of my colleague Koum Mohamed, who sadly died over the course of the project, but he left his mark on it. He left behind his ideas, when it comes to the building of this tool that we can use now for educational purposes. It's also used as a platform so that engineers, Moroccan water engineers the traditional managers can work together along with civil society, along with artists and urban planners. Thank you. Thank you very much, Thierry. That was very interesting. I think that this week we've had different case studies on Monday and Tuesday, for example. We were talking about the Lyon case with its water table that is getting lower. So up to 2050, it will get even lower. So we've seen Lyon, we've seen Valencia in Spain, where we've seen semi-desertification. And now this is Morocco, where we've gone from -8 to -80, I believe. 100, here we're at a depth of 100 meters. So because of climate change, but also because of human beings, because of over-exploitation of the water table. So you've got this notion of technology. We've talked about the technologies used. They're very complex technologies, and we'll see that with the next presentation. Vernacular technology, old technology still has a value. It still helps to structure our societies. Is there some hope for Marrakesh? Is there any hope for recharging the water table, for bringing it back up to a better level? Well, the people, the tens and thousands of, well, there are all these boreholes that have to stop. I don't know if there's much hope, really. We thought that the energy cost would put a stop to things, but in fact, there are solar facilities that are substituting oil-fired facilities, and the water table regulation mechanisms are not going to work on their own without some kind of reorganization of the land, of the region, without any thinking about how to share this water table and manage it so that it can be kept as it is, but also so that it can retrieve its former capacities. So the mountain economy is developing in Morocco. This is what we're seeing as well. There are areas where some people win, there are other areas where some people lose. So these mountain areas with terraced agriculture, terraced orchards, there's a lot of intense agriculture. So the water is retained by the mountain populations in their watershed. And now I'm going to introduce the next person. Mrs. Corinne Castel is a director of research at the CNRS inside the Archéorient lab in Lyon. So she focuses on urban development, Syro-Mesopotamia, habitat, urban development, religious architecture, strategies for human adaptation strategies in arid places, sedentary peoples in arid places, the archaeology of landscapes. And she's going to be talking to us today about the aflaj, and this is part of a study carried out in Lyon. And so Pia le Cauchois, so Corinne Castel, you have the floor.
So we're very happy to be part of this webinar, and your communication are actually most interesting. So thank you to Claire-Lise for the invitation. The presentation is the result of a recent collaboration between INSA Lyon engineers, expert in hydrology, and a team of researchers from the CNRS and Lyon University in archaeological project in Oman, Sultanate of Oman. So Pia le Cauchois, she as grant for a project called Hydrography and Hydrographic survey in the Omani region. So Jean-Luc Bertrand Karjeski was the Pia explored the hydraulical development of the Bat Oasis with an archaeological site which is dating back to the 3000 BC. He was also with us on a nearby archaeological site, the Al-Ahari site, which documents the same old period. So the Sultanate of Oman, as you see, is in the oriental tip of the Arabic Peninsula, with the Gulf of Oman in the north and the Arabian Sea in the east. A large desert plain covers most of the center of the country. The mountains chain of Jebel Aja extend to the east. The Jebel Arda is at 3,000 meters high. The south piedmont of the Jebel gives a sharp line of field garden in the historical heart of Oriental Arabia. So the oasis and agricultural lands are connected to one another in only a few hours of walk. In 3000 BC, there is no city in the city, the Sultanate of Oman, and there was no text of that period, but it is known because of the textual source of Mesopotamia, which is not too far. It was tested as the Magan country for the first time in a description by Sargon Akkad, the first emperor of in 2300 BC. So you see top left in the text, Magan appears as a far region from which wood, stones, and copper is brought by boat. The map dates back to 3rd millennium in BC in the region. So we've indicated the true sites at the time where we worked. Bat, which is you see a red circle, which is listed in the World Heritage, and Al-Arid, 15 kilometers northwest. Al-Arid. This is the map that we established more precisely of the region between Bat and Al-Arid, the region of the study, where we studied today. There is no lasting or durable river. You know, acacias, tamarisk and jujube trees are very recent. So it is an open and very harsh, very unforgiving environment. The carbonized seeds found in the archaeological sites in Bath and Al-Ahri show that vegetation was the same 3000 BC. So therefore, we can consider we were dealing with a similar landscape. The climatic data since the Holocene are not well known, but it appears that around 3000 before BC climate was similar to the present one, following a sort of desertification after the Neolithic. The question of water hydric stress is essential because access to lasting water means that there could be permanent or durable dwellings. To do agriculture, we cannot do agriculture without irrigation. The landscape of the Piedmont of the Oman mountains shows that there are staged crops, uses the aflaj, depending on the local systems, or more precisely, the Daudiceles. So the underground galleries bring water to the locations needed away from evaporation. So water will come downstream to irrigate the crops or the farming zones. You know, it is what you call Kanat in Syria, Iran, Egypt, or in Maghreb, or Rezada in Morocco, that has just been described by Thierry. This technique of emerging gallery made it possible to develop traditional agriculture where the date palm has been prevailing. So 5 aflaj from Oman are listed in the UNESCO World Heritage. This is 2 examples. They're very old, but you see one here on the left-hand side in the United Arab Emirates, and another one on the right-hand side in Syria. However, the advent of such systems and techniques, their origin and history, they are still poorly known and still discussed even today. For a long time, it was considered that the old aflaj started to dated back to 600 BC, and there was an idea of diffusion. We thought indeed that such techniques came from Iran or Persia, when agriculture is older by a few millennium. But now we would tend to agree that it is a polycentric and multi-period technical innovation, as written by Rémy Bouchara. It was born in different territories, but it was invented and reinvented at different times in history using tables which were more or less deep or wide. We think that the oldest galleries date back to the stone Iron Age, but some mentioned that they could even be older than that, possibly as of the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC. But we see that the excavation makes it possible to reconsider the last hypothesis, because it is a key period which documents major socioeconomic mutations. Indeed, at the end of the 4th and the 3rd millennium BC correspond to major changes period. We observe an demographic increase and expansion of the communities inland. You saw the map earlier on with density of sites. Sites will multiply and communities become more sedentary, but we don't know exactly when throughout the period. So we observe as well a progressive social complexification and the advent of new technologies. You know, in meridional Arabia, population adapted the production economy late versus the Mesopotamian fertile crescent, but maybe 2 millennium before BC. Agriculture did exist, as it was shown, of wheat and the rest of palm trees. So we have to see if there could be wild palm trees, but we have to see that the subsistence economy was based partly on agriculture and culture of dead palms. One of the major questions is as follows: are we dealing then with the Oasis agro-system that where there would be a question mark as on the image, or possibly is it purely irrigated agriculture using branching off of the flood system, which we call the halifales? But this is a debated question together with that of the date of advent of the first aflaj. This is why we launched a new program by associating hydrologists with us. The mission of in this September was created in 2019, and it questioned the very nature of human implantation, well, the dwellings and the subsistence modes. Were sites occupied by sedentary communities, and what was life there? The question of water resources is essential, but the discovery of the old hydraulic installation of the various period raised again the question of the first irrigation technique and of their nature in these zones. In the plain, the wet flood after a major rain in 1920 revealed two old channels were not visible before. We were lucky to be there. The old canal was well visible, as you can see here. The most recent one in green on this map is aligned with what we can see at the surface of the Holocene terrace on the south. That is linear depression, access wells which are well aligned, and downstream you see a little reservoir. All those characteristics are part of the same set. We explored part of this phallage on green on the map, and we find it with the coverage slab here. You see here, and you see it on the top right. You see one specific interesting specific in terms of chronology is that this section of the phallage has a new channel identified in 2019 by the Wed River, and then blue on the side. So the green phallage was posterior to the old canal. Because we did the excavation, you understood, if you look at the left with the two channels, well, at the intersection of the two, in the little square, gray square here. we wanted to date the two superimposed channels. The most recent one was dated thanks to palm tree carbon, which we found in the hydraulic mortar about 20 meters upstream from the aqueduct. You can see the image bottom left here. This phallage dates back to the Islamic period. So it has an older period which goes under the Holocene terrace, on which there is the archaeological site of 3000 BC. So two carbon ratio datation were done, one in 2019 and the other one in 2020. Dates are identical and more very old, as you can see. So we're talking about the end of the 4th millennium BC. So if it is difficult to identify the period of use of such canals, well, it is anterior to the Islamic phallage. So we wanted to know more in 2022. So we explored south. Several trenches made it possible to find it, that we used a mechanic hoover. You know, we came back about a month ago, so we used a mechanic hoover, which was we were able to dig deep, and so far it was detected over a length of 151 meters for the time being. So you can see an image here, you see, which shows you here. You see on the right hand side the old canal we found, and that we will see on the following images. So you see other images of this old canal that we found at different locations in the 151 meter. And we may continue. The excavation showed that it is an old open canal. There is no covering slabs. Cross section, we can see it comprises two parts. Lower part with almost vertical walls over about 30 to 70 centimeters, and the upper zone which is flared, opening up, which was 55 to 70 centimeters of height, depending on the erosion processes. And the two archaeologists have shown that the two morphological parts of the old canal represent, in fact, two different stratigraphic units. The phase 1, that is the lowest one, correspond to the old utilization of the canal, and with longitudinal solid transport. This is where water was flowing. Phase 2 above is posterior and has a diversity of fascia with pebbles and stones, which results from more local process and lateral aspect. And these facies come from the collapse of the walls. So we are dealing with open face canal over 151 meters long. Sorry, we were not able to update our PowerPoint, sorry. Then second conclusion, this phallage runs in parallel with this whole canal runs in parallel with the Islamic phallage in the southern part. It is developed in the terrace where there is the 3rd millennium site, and it leads water, it takes water from south to north, to much to our surprise, like counter flowing from the WED, which we call the Oasis. So we need to confirm the dates of this period, which could be done this year thanks to wood carbon samples and the technique, or the datation technique, which measured the period when the mineral were last exposed to light. So we are lucky this year because those samples for the C14 and were sampled in good situations, well stratified and sealed. Therefore, we should be able soon to be able to date with a high certainty this old canal, and we are waiting for the results. I will now give the floor to Pia, who will take us to Bath, 15 meters southwest of Al Arid, southeast of Al Arid. I will now discuss our work in the Bath Oasis with an annual temperature of 28 degrees and mean rainfall of 80 millimeters per year. It is a hyper so it's inhospitable, but these lands for several generations now have adapted themselves to the context. So it is in the life of desert that the Oasis ecosystem exists. It is in the sentence without which life will not be. It is classified in UNESCO, dating back to the Bronze Age, which have been studied by archaeologists since in Bat we can find still today 2 aflaj, and they take their source in the floor of the Wed upstream from the Oasis, and they run 4 kilometers underground before getting to irrigation channel. We see it later during the implementation of the maps. When we study today's oasis in Baths and by characterizes its rapid evolution in the last decades, it will be possible to better define the hydraulic characteristic of the network and the associated irrigation practice. This will mean a useful interpretation material for the old dwellings, especially that of Alarid that was discussed earlier on. The objective is not to reconstitute the past directly from today, but we want to make sure that comparative elements of the study would give archaeologists operational indices and functioning of systems. The research on hydrography and on the agricultural techniques or in Oman will make it possible to valorize this heritage. For this, we got involved in a survey with satellite imaging and the ethnographic survey which took place within the oasis. Took place in, you see 2 images of the oasis and its organization. So this is the hydrographic map of the oasis. You see the geomorphological organization of the territories. First, the alluvial plain in yellow and the current bed of the Wed on the right-hand side. And in the heart of this, alluvial plain, there are cultivation terraces done by accumulation of sediments. And you will see the palm ray here, the palm garden in green, with irrigated surface which spread around it. To the map, we will add the developments made. You see the location of the archaeological remains in the north, dating to Bronze Age, and the concentration of towers of the same period with the names. So to place the context, we know that more than 50 years since the arrival of Al-Qaboos Sultan in the landscape of Sultanate of Oman have evolved in terms of urban development, political hierarchy, change in communities, and with the reorganization of the country, we see in the outer oasis the traces of a collective life community which we are moving towards individuality. Here we can see in the oasis a high concentration of which is the old village, but today the urban planning is spread on the other side of the Palmeraie, and with this the irrigated zones. Moreover, upstream from the oasis, walls have been built to protect well, by collaborating with geomorphologists, hydrologists, they were able to understand the evolution of the river and the mobility which was modified by the which is the urban development which is in the riverbed. So this is an example of modernization of the falage today. Since 1985, the 2 Bats falage have been concrete lined, which facilitated their maintenance because, you know, rains caused less damage, and since 2002 pumps have been installed to help in the flow rate because it has dropped in the last decades. And the manager of Flage have put concrete on the old work when we asked them about the construction techniques of the for the slope calculation or hydraulic calculation. In fact, they're often forgotten because of the evolution of technologies and constructions. One example on the right-hand side of the fact that several canals have been replaced by tubes and pipes and valves. This is not generalized, but we see it more and more, this type of installation, which is fed by pumps and not by the falage. And then we get to the map of the hydraulic installation of the Bath sector.
So the organization installation is around BAT. There are 2 in activity in BAT. So here in light blue, you've got the Zerbi ones, and then at the bottom, you've got the Sire. You can see the underground area, all of this part upstream, and this is where they arrive, and they come out here into open channels. We can see that they're not individual. There are 2 junctions, one here and a second one here, and they work together under the authority of the wakil, who is the person in charge of the aflaj. So we can also see that there are traces of the old Zerbi aflaj in dark blue. This was deviated, but we can see the traces of the old well. Today, this is where water comes out in flood times. Around the Oasis, you can find abandoned wells with flooding channels, and in the Oasis, there are many wells that are still being used. So the old people say that at BAT, over 7 faraj were active at the same time. Today, there are no longer any traces visible, but you can see faraj number 3 here in orange, which is still very visible. And it bears witness to a more intense activity. Here we've got some examples of different traces of these canals. So there's the well, and then there's an open air canal here. So finally, let me just zoom in on the irrigation canals for the aflaj in BAT. So during the mission, we were able to organize a shared organization for the regional oasis. For example, the output point for the canal for the underground part and the overground part is called the Sharia, and it constitutes the point for people to come and pick up water. There's also a mosque here in orange. Often it's not far from the cemetery, so that funeral rituals can be carried out. Then you have showers for men, and then showers for women in an area where they can also wash clothes. All of this means that the canal is dedicated to irrigation here, and you can see the share between the different plots. So I'm now going to hand back over to Corinne, who's going to conclude. So understanding the basic principles of the management of the organization of water in a country that's radically changed over the last 50 years allows archaeologists to ask the right questions in order to interpret the hydraulic remains. The past cannot be directly recreated based on the present, of course. Such an approach would lead to anachronisms. But as Pia said, the comparison provides archaeologists clues about how the system works and is used. Observation of the aflaj, more recent, allows more questions to be asked from an archaeological point of view and to direct research towards possible explanations that didn't come up during the dig. For example, we can ask new questions about the very nature of the hydraulic facilities and their maintenance, or about the estimation of flow rates that can help us to understand the nature of our site. Was it lived in throughout the year or not? And the use of the hydraulic schemes at different periods. So the aflaj and all of the catchment techniques, storage, distribution techniques reflect a remarkable ability of the local population passed down from generation to generation for thousands of years to settle, survive, and prosper in a hyper-arid context. But they have a history, and these traditional techniques, little by little, were abandoned and forgotten. We had the visit of Professor Al-Ghafri, who's just created a new UNESCO chair focusing on the study of aflaj. Like us, Professor Al-Ghafri and the different specialists accompanying him are interested in a kind of archaeohydrology. They hope to develop more cooperation, and they've invited us to take part. Altogether, we know that it's important to protect and underline the value of this exceptional heritage that links men to their environment and something that's allowed them to live for generations and generations. These questions are not just scientific and historical, however. With major transformations taking place in the country, impelled by Sultan Qaboos in the 1970s, the traditional lifestyle has really been unsettled over the past few decades. There's been urban development, urban sprawl. They've become the rule, and oases have been abandoned by younger generations in Oman, and their maintenance is up to immigrant populations now. So there has been demographic growth, over exploitation of the water resource, and climate change. So this means that we need to worry about water stress. Contemporary systems are showing their limits today in Oman, because today we're bringing water from the region over several hundreds of kilometers. So there are huge pipelines that are currently being developed and that are installed in the region that come from this sea. So 4/5 of the water consumption now comes from desalination of seawater. Now, the area logic behind water management has become complicated. It seems to us therefore important everywhere in the world to reuse and renovate these old aflaj together with introducing modern technologies. This is what's done in some countries such as Iran and Tunisia already. But even in countries where the climate is more temperate, and in many Western countries, we're looking for solutions to put a stop to overexploitation of water without reducing the level of comfort of populations. Renovating these traditional hydraulic techniques will help with this, and securing access to the water resource is what is really at stake. So our work at BAT and LRE notably are the opportunity to try and fight against this galloping urban development and the destruction of the Oasis ecosystem in Oman that has been resilient for so many years. It's also the opportunity to show that history and know-how that is not Western can teach us things, can help us to face droughts. It's also a way to bring the past and present together while thinking about a future for the Oasis of Bat and its archaeological site that is classed as UNESCO World Heritage. So we've got great heritage. It's perfectly adapted to the realities of climate change. So we can thus contribute, and this is what we're being asked to do. We're contributing to thinking with the Omani authorities about a visitor center. The idea is to think about the Bat Oasis in a holistic manner to associate the populations and the environment over the long term. We hope, therefore, that we'll be able to contribute to designing a better future, more adapted to the realities of climate change and to the challenges of an Omani society that is currently going through transition, that is turning more and more towards tourism. Hopefully, this will be intelligent tourism. Thank you very much for your attention. So I suggest we finish with the presentation that will be given by Miklas. Miklas is a professor and engineer in water resources at Lund in Sweden. He's the coordinator of the European project H2020 WATERAGRI. He has the chair of civil engineering at Salford in the United Kingdom, and he's an emeritus professor at Johannesburg University for Technology in the Free State of South Africa. He's also a professor at the University of Environmental Sciences at Wrocław. He works on wastewater and permeable pavements. So we're moving to a very different context with different problems, where climate change is nevertheless a challenge. So Miklas, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. It's a presentation about water retention and nutrient recycling in soils and watercourses for agriculture. And the full title of the EU Horizon 2020 project that I'm presenting is actually called Water Retention and Nutrient Recycling in Soils and Streams for Improved Agriculture Production. And the word in streams should probably more read in waste streams, but this is subject to interpretation. So what is our vision? Our vision is to solve agriculture, water management, and soil fertilization challenges in a sustainable manner to secure affordable food production in Europe for the 21st century. As in essence, it's about securing water and food security in Europe. Yeah, at our kickoff meeting, we made a number of pictures, and here you can see one of them with a lot of fairly well-known figures in the area of water and food security. I'm the coordinator of this project WATERAGRI. My academic background is in water environmental engineering, and in particular in wetland systems. I've published quite a lot, almost 290 journal articles so far, with a total citation of almost 10,000 and an age index of almost 50. And WATERAGRI has a price tag of 7 million euros, and we are almost halfway through now. And we are about to finish a project called Rain Solutions. That's a little bit more away from the agricultural area, more in the urban area. And there the value is a bit more than 1.5 million. So what are now our WATERAGRI objectives? It's to co-develop the links between agriculture, land and soil sediment water management. We undertake technical and sustainable assessments of proposed measures and develop a cloud-based simulation and data assimilation system. And we also undertake a lot of work on the ground to identify, develop, and test affordable and easy to implement technical and operational farm solutions. We then assess the proposed techniques for their potential regarding the adaptation to climate change. And at the end, we disseminate our findings to farmers, advisory service, and high-level decision makers. We have a number of case studies across Europe. In particular, we're focusing on boreal climates in the north and continental climates in the center and in northern part of Italy, and on the Pannonian climate, which is essentially the area around Hungary. We have 2 sites in Finland, one in Sweden, another one in Germany, and France, Poland, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, and finally Italy. So what can we expect from our pilots? In the first Finnish case study, it's about an improvement of water regulation for potato farming and development of automatic drainage. In the second Finnish site, it's about water regulation to limit subsidence, nutrient and acidity leaching, and greenhouse gas emissions from organic soils. And in Sweden, we are looking to improve the planting sequence and also field management. While in France, we adjust the crop rotation, nutrient management, and we think about different ways of how we can control drainage and adjust wetland technology. And in Germany, we determine drought stress responses of plants in order to optimize irrigation. Here you can see some pictures of our pilots. In the first Finnish case study, on the top left, you see potato farming on mineral soils in a regionally and European-wide important area of farming. In Sweden, on a farm called Gårdstock Nygård, north of Lund, north of Malmö, we have 200 hectares of organic and 800 hectares of conventional farming. In Germany, we have crops such as sugar beet, winter wheat, winter barley, maize, and rapeseed. And on the second Finnish side, we have essentially grass production on shallow peat soils overlaid by problematic acidic sulfate containing soils. And in France, we have actually 4,000 hectares of water catchment area planted with oilseed, rape, wheat, barley, and maize. So what can we expect from our other 5 case study sites? In Poland, an improvement of water availability, which should result in high yields of the cultivated crops. In Switzerland, we maintain high level of food production through intelligent water, soil, and nutrient management. In Austria, we investigate water flows on farm levels and improve irrigation in order to enhance the yield from different crops. In Hungary, we reduce artificial fertilizers to adapt to climate change and to reduce the available conventional water resources in order to save water. In Italy, optimization of irrigation water retention, agricultural drainage, water treatment, and also nutrient recovery. And here are the corresponding pictures to these plots. In Poland, we look at wheat, rye, maize, barley, oat, and oilseed rape. In Austria, we have essentially experimental agricultural field where we can do a lot of different things. In Italy, we look at different crops on agricultural farm soils, and these crops are mainly winter wheat, soya, maize, fruits, and vegetables. In Switzerland, it's purely vegetable farming. on a large scale. And in Hungary, we have 16 hectares of pastoral with sprinkler irrigation for cattle grazing, and also 50 hectares of irrigated arable land. So now the question is, what are our WATERAGRI solutions? And they are essentially grouped in three groups. We have first everything that relates to modeling. In the second group, we have things about our technologies for water retention. And in the third group, we have solutions for nutrient retention. And some of these solutions are in both of the latter groups. Let's start with the modeling framework or WATERAGRI framework. And there we have the framework itself. And we have also then integrated physically based terrestrial system models. We have decision support system. We have then the water vapor absorption, isotherm, and water retention characteristics model. We have a web GIS for zoning landscape matrix, and we have series gaming to improve stakeholder engagement. So what are now our innovative and sustainable water retention solutions? We have first the farm constructed wetlands for water retention, the remote sensing pipeline, irrigation management and agrometeorological monitoring solutions. We have precision irrigation systems, enhanced water retainer product and concept. We have biochar for water retention, tracer methods, and finally the dewaterability estimation test apparatus, which replaces the capillary suction time test equipment item. So now comes the solutions that are there to recover the nutrients. We have again the farm constructed wetlands, but this time not for water retention, but for nutrient recovery. We have a drainage system, we have bio-based nutrient controlled membranes, biochar absorbents for nutrient uptake, and we have a microfluidic systems. And because you're based or mainly based in France, they are based in Paris. This is our only French partner. So what's now the WATERAGRI innovation potential? Let's look at the individual innovations there. We have the framework in combination with various modeling tools. There, the developed framework will support near real-time decisions for the management of small agricultural catchments. Then we have the series game, where the goal is to engage the farming community and increase the acceptance of our proposed solutions. Then we have our integrated constructed wetlands, our farm constructed wetlands. And there we will use monitoring technology to expand stakeholder knowledge, reduce uncertainties of nutrient and water retention processes in the field and also in the wider farm catchment. In terms of remote sensing, WATERAGRI will utilize recently developed remote sensing techniques together with with various satellite imageries. We have then the dewaterability estimation test. This will be developed to test how easy it is to dewater mixtures of solids and liquids, such as agricultural wastewater and sludge. And we have the drainage system. There, WATERAGRI proposes a multifunctional bio-inspired drainage system that will help to reduce irrigation water use and to enhance nutrient retention capacity, as well as plant uptake. Let's go on to the next slide. We look at nutrient recovery by membranes. They provide a new option to reduce the eutrophication impact from agriculture and also improve nutrient self-sufficiency. Then we have biochar, which will improve the moisture retention capacity of soils and act also as a nutrient absorbent for the runoff water. So it basically does both water retention and nutrient reuse. Then we have microfluidics at the end, which enables the agriculture community to benefit from this energy saving and compact technology. So this was an outline about WATERAGRI in general. Let's have a look at Lund's. This is the Lund University's key contributions to the WATERAGRI project. And I will briefly outline our wetlands influenced by climate change. And this is an experimental system in the lab using climate chambers. And I would say something about our guidance for farm constructed wetlands as well, which is a bit more applied. So first, wetlands and climate change, simulation of future climate change scenarios on experimental wetlands within climate control chambers. So on the bottom right there, you can see me taking some gas samples from natural peatlands, and to have a check when the peat soil degrades, what would be the gases, the greenhouse gases which are being released. So if you have a look now at climate change in the wider sense, the temperature increases that we are expecting is likely to be up to 6 degrees until the next century, unless emissions of greenhouse gas are reduced. There's an increase of temperature, which leads to changes in precipitation, and this could result both in flooding, but also in drought. Wetlands are land areas that are saturated with water permanently or seasonally, and beneficial ecosystem services of wetlands are flood control, the storage of water during heavy rainfall, the slowed down runoff, and the reduction of flood peaks and improvement of water quality. However, if these wetlands are unmanaged, then the ecosystem disservices would be carbon release to the atmosphere and nutrient release to receiving watercourses. On the bottom, you can see our experimental wetland on the right-hand side, the peatland, and on the left-hand side, you can see a swamp. And you see a little bit of a difference there. You can see much more succession on the right-hand side. The stress factors for the wetlands should be prevented or at least reduced. Regulation of water inflow, reduction of pollution due to wetland degradation, controlling unwanted vegetation, and protecting biological diversity. So, for example, the trees which are encroaching on the wetland here, very often birches, need to be removed. So on the top right corner, you can see one of our PhD students taking some peatland samples. So what are now the aims and objectives of our project? So the aims are to assess climate change adaptation strategies for wetlands receiving pre-treated stormwater runoff to improve the long-term water quality. So the idea basically is to increase the water level by using excess water that is somewhere else not needed in order to adapt to climate change. So these aims are achieved by the following objectives: to assess precipitation and temperature subject to various climate scenarios, to evaluate the degradation processes within wetlands, to understand wetland biochemical processes and subsequently to manipulate them to improve water quality, to investigate the impact of the different climate scenarios on the carbon emission from the natural wetlands, and to optimize the water level management within wetlands to increase their efficiency. So on this picture, you can see on the far right a climate chamber, and in the middle a picture of our pristine systems when we started off. These climate chambers have the temperature range with lighting on between -10 and 60 degrees. And we have an ultrasonic humidity range of 30 to 90%, daylight, 840 type illumination intensity control, and we look at 10 regional models for data for southern Sweden, and 30 years of historical and of model data. On this slide, you can see on the left-hand side the experimental layout, where we have 4 climate chambers, where the first climate chamber is looking at the current climate. Actually, it's not correct. It's the current climate -1 year, so that we know exactly what is actually happening. And in the second, third, and fourth chamber, we look at different carbon scenarios, basically different percentage of carbon in the air. And then we have both peatlands and constructed wetlands, and also receiving watercourses, which in this case is a simulated lake environment. And we are then looking how these different climate scenarios impacts on our wetland systems, and the lake included. And on the right-hand side, you can see what we're actually doing after the first year. After the first year, we split the system in managed and unmanaged systems. Managed means, in this case, that we control the water level to make sure that the wetland does not degrade. So this is all work in progress. However, we have already some initial publications. The first one, which is listed here, is a review paper, while the second one looks at the impact of the future climate scenarios on peatland constructed wetlands water quality and the water level management. And then the last paper looks at the response of peatland carbon dioxide sink function to future climate change scenarios, as well as the water level management. And if you would like to have a copy, you're very welcome to contact me afterwards. So let's have a brief look at farm-constructed wetlands. They're used for water treatment and retention, as well as nutrient recovery. And the idea is that what we have learned with our climate chambers, we're now putting into practice as essentially guidance documents for stakeholders and for policymakers. So what is now a farm-constructed wetland? What is this? So there we're trying to couple the constructed wetland on the left-hand side with the farming wastewater on the right-hand side. And the farming wastewater could be a farmyard runoff water, it could be runoff water from fields. And a definition of a farm-constructed wetland is as follows. A farm-constructed wetland is defined as an ecologically engineered system comprising of a series of shallow surface flow constructed wetland cells containing emergent vegetation, which is designed to receive and to treat farmyard runoff. And essentially, we are mimicking nature by having a natural biological system where a lot of treatment takes part below the surface in the spaces between very often gravel or other kind of soils. So furthermore, what do we actually need? We need different wastewaters, and I mentioned already farm or field runoff. Also silo, diary, and piggery wastewater is another option. Then dynamic and combined water purification takes place. This could be overland flow, horizontal or vertical flow, while vertical flow would actually reduce the land requirement quite considerably, which also reduces the cost. And for this, we have a slide later on. In terms of nutrient recycling, it takes place via the effluent reuse benefiting crops, water storage for irrigation and flood control, habitat creation, ecosystem restoration, improved drainage of effluent with less solids, increase of local air moisture, and cost savings through design optimization. So what is now required to use these farm-constructed wetlands? We would say we would need incentives from all stakeholders, farmers, local authorities, and policy support. We need about half to 5% of the farm area for the constructed farm wetlands, plus the farm wastewater for treatment. We need deeper inflow zone of maybe up to 2 meters for sedimentation, a vegetation zone of up to ½ meter deep, and in volume usually of 1.5 to 3,000 cubic meters for an average sized farm. We have meanders to increase retention time, and we also look at natural sealants like clay soil, for example. And an initial investment for implementation is required and a long-term plan for sustainability as well. And more information is in our published Farm Constructed Wetland Guidebook, which is the basis for our studies in WATERAGRI, and which we are updating as we go along. So what are now the benefits? High level of treatment and robustness, efficient treatment of phosphorus, nitrogen, BOD, suspended solids, hydrocarbons, and pathogens. Also nutrient recycling for increased yield and decreased fertilizer application, low-cost farm wastewater treatment and simple operation, habitat and biodiversity enhancement, improved drainage of the wastewater, sediment capture, improved microclimate, reduced water use during droughts, runoff and flood management, and odor minimization. And the whole system overall is supposed to be also aesthetically pleasing. So what are now the costs of these kind of systems? So the cost of farm-constructed wetlands for wastewater treatment comprise both capital and operational costs, while the capital costs refer to the cost of the land needed for the installation of the facility, the construction costs themselves, and engineer and contractor fees. The farm-constructed wetland construction costs are comparable or lower than the cost for conventional biological wastewater treatment plants, providing the same or at least a similar level of treatment. In terms of operational costs, they are, however, much lower than for conventional treatment plants. And monitoring costs are linked mainly to research projects and are very often not mandatory. So in terms of the cost, now a bit more specific, land use purchase costs, they are very, very variable. For example, depending on country, an average maybe of 3,000 euros in Europe. Design and planning, minimum 1,000 euros. Construction costs are also extremely variable. let's say around 20,000 euros. Installation, implementation, commissioning cost, again, very variable, maybe about 5,000 euros. Running cost and maintenance cost, a minimum of 1,000 euros per annum. Monitoring, which is optional, a minimum of 1,000 euros per annum, and it's mainly the cost for analysis. And obviously, there could be decommissioning cost with standard wastewater treatment plants. However, this is usually not required for farm-constructed wetlands because they often become part of the landscape itself when they're not in use anymore. So in total, 30 to 40,000 euros per small to medium-sized farm. And again, the big variability of the land use is the big unknown for a lot of people. So let's have a look at how these kind of information associated with our farm constructed wetlands can actually be used for our WATERAGRI framework. And the framework itself will guide practitioners in selecting and designing farm constructed wetlands. We have simplified models to describe the processes within the farm constructed wetland systems. And we have models which are tools to compare two or more similar systems. That's optional, and the behaviors under different conditions. We are predicting the performance of a given farm constructed wetland, and we're looking in particular at what if questions and look at different scenarios and option study. Models perform the farm constructed wetland system controls. And later on, I refer to a paper by Meyer and others where different farm wetland models were looked up in greater details, which might be of interest for some of the academics among you. And that is the third reference that you can see here. And then we have our farm constructed wetland book or booklet, which has been published also as a journal paper in Bioresource Technology. And then we have the classification methodology for sustainable flood retention basins, which also includes farm constructed wetlands. So now we're coming to an end. A little quote by myself. The WATERAGRI project is about researching the new frontiers in integrated water resources management of small agricultural catchments to improve both European agricultural production and the status of local ecosystems. So you can find more on our websites, WATERAGRI EU, and you can follow us on various social media. In terms of the project, there are 23 partners. There is the coordinating partner Lund University, then Eden Microfluidics in Paris in France, Jülich Forschungszentrum in Germany, VTT, a research center in Finland, Debrecen University in Hungary, Alchemia Nova, a consultancy company and innovation company in Vienna, in Austria as well, and Agrogeo, a small innovation company in Hungary, then BOKU, a famous agricultural university in Vienna. Then we have the oldest university in the Western world, which is University of Bologna in Italy. Then University of Salford in Manchester. Then Canale Emiliano Romagnolo, so I'm sure I'm pronounced this completely wrong, which is a canal association, a drainage association in northern Italy. Then CDR, which is a Polish stakeholder organization, which do a lot of work in terms of educating farmers. Then we have Innocence in Serbia, which is a destination company. And then we have Wrocław University of Environment and Life Science in Poland by Zoltan, a non-profit organization it's a research organization in Hungary. Then we have Vultus, an innovation company, mainly dealing with remote sensing in Lund in Sweden. Then we have TU Delft in the Netherlands. Then we have UNINE. These are our hardcore modelers in Switzerland. Then we have Gords of Nygard, our farm in Sweden. Then we have University of Oulu in the far north in Finland. Then we have Agricolus in Italy, and this one is a famous agricultural software company. And I have to apologize, I made a mistake earlier on when I said that Eden Microfluidics, or now Eden Tech, is the only French organization. We have actually also INRAE, which is a French research organization who is also one of our partners, but with a rather small budget. And then we have Martin Regelsberger, a famous wetland scientist, which essentially is a one-man band and based also in Austria. So that's now a little bit of an overview. I say thank you very much for listening. I understand it's already very late and we're far behind the time schedule. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you have need to get in touch with me afterwards, use the email address here. And yeah, I hope it was interesting. It's a little bit different to what you have seen before. And now I stop sharing and give back to our conference organizers.